Hello and good evening, everyone. I'm Kim Fuller, and welcome to the HR for Health webinar, Sick Pay, Taxes, Loans, Stimulus Package Updates for Your Practice. There's nothing more important than protecting your practice, but that's easier said than done. 2021 continues to introduce new laws that are mandatory for practices to follow. In tonight's webinar, you're going to learn, can employees use FFCRA to take and recover from the vaccine? Can you get tax credits if you paid employees for time off related to COVID-19? Is the CARES Act extended, and how does that impact you? And are there minimum wage updates? If you have questions, please enter them into the Q&A box and we will do our best to answer them at the end. We're so excited as always to have Ali Oromchian, co-founder of HR for Health, presenting for you this evening. HR for Health is a cloud-based human resources software designed to simplify human resources for healthcare practices. So now I turn it over to Ali.
Great, thank you, Kim. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Happy Wednesday. So, Kim is exactly right. I mean, this has been a whirlwind of change the last several months, especially since President Trump passed numerous rules at the end of his presidency in December with regard to the PPP loans, and then with President Biden's new stimulus packages. Things have changed a little bit, and some of you may feel overwhelmed again. Maybe not as overwhelmed as last March when there was new things coming out every hour, it seemed like. But there are new rules that are in place now, some things that are really important for you to know from an HR perspective, from a PPP perspective, from an FFCRA perspective. So we're going to try to go through all of these tonight. There are going to be deeper seminars on some of these very topics that CPAs are doing and whatnot. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but we're going to try to hit as much of this as we can tonight so that you have a good foundation for maybe getting more information from your CPA, or if you attend another seminar about the tax credits or whatnot, you have a good foundation for before you go into that. So we're going to jump in right into it right now. This is probably not going to take the full hour, although I am going to try to see if I can answer some questions at the end. So just kind of keep that in mind. But let's jump into why is this important? Well, as you guys know, I really always believe that whenever you're dealing with any of this kind of thing that we're dealing with, whether it's HR, whether it's taxes, whether it's FFCRA, it's all about the small things. It's all about the little parts of these rules that make the biggest differences. And the reality is that when you read about these rules, when you read about them online, when you hear about them on the news, they're hitting the very high level parts of it. They're not really kind of going into the nitty gritty. And that's part of the problem, because we assume certain things are in play, or we assume maybe we don't qualify, or maybe we do qualify, or this doesn't apply to us. And then we find out that the rules were actually a little bit more specific. And so we're going to get into some of that nitty gritty. As most of you know, my wife is a pediatric dentist. This is a picture of our family, and I show this picture for a lot of reasons, but one primarily because I live your life. I am going through all of this with her as well, and so it's important for you to know that a lot of the things that we're talking about are things that we're really implementing, not just for all of our clients at HR for Health and my law firm, but also her practice. And so we're going to be talking about some little things that might trip you up, that are tripping a lot of other folks up since really September, October of last year from an HR perspective. And I want you to avoid that. So we're going to go into deep detail about that as well. As most of you know, I am an HR attorney, a dental attorney, and we work with optometrists, dentists, physicians all across the country, working on practice transitions, partnerships, lease reviews, of course, HR as well, but also partnerships and incorporations. And so this is all we do every day. And so if you have any questions about any of these other topics, I'd be happy to answer them here or offline. There's many different ways you can kind of get a hold of me that way. So let's start with why this topic is important. Well, I kind of implied it a few minutes ago. Since September-ish, October of last year, 2020, what we are seeing right now is a really an epidemic of sorts, where we are seeing a ton of cases being filed against doctors across the country with regard to some of these things that we're going to talk about tonight, primarily having to do with, not giving leave appropriately, potentially retaliating against someone who's asking for leave, and those kinds of things. And so the numbers are there, and these cases are coming up. A lot of these cases, just so you know, are not really valid cases. They're not cases where the doctor didn't necessarily anything wrong, but what's happening is that these kind of technical violations are causing employees to go to plaintiffs' lawyers and others, and and sending letters, demand letters and whatnot, and it's just a distraction for everybody. So our belief, from the very beginning has been to kind of educate you and give you as much information as possible so that you know when to raise your hand. You're never going to be an HR expert. I'm not expecting that. Your employees aren't expecting that. You shouldn't expect that of yourself. You're a dentist, you're an optometrist, you're a physician. You're focused on your business, and that's how it should be. But what we want you to know is that when we give you this information so that you are able to raise your hand and say, you know what, something doesn't seem right here, or I have a question, or I need help. And so that's when you raise your hand and you call us, and we kind of walk you through it so that you're not making mistakes. Some fun stats for you. In 2019, there was about 1.2 million people in the United States that were paid under the minimum wage. They were paid under the minimum wage, which is an incredible number when you think about it. Now, of course, in most of your offices, that's not an issue, but I raise that fun fact because it's these kinds of things that occur that we don't think about it. And there's a lot of these things, it may not be minimum wage, but there are these other things that we'll go through that are impacting your office. And as most of you have heard me say before, the average case is somewhere between 1 to 2 times someone's annual salary in settlements and attorney's fees and whatnot. So this is definitely something to try to avoid. So here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the small business relief acts and programs that have been passed by Congress and the president, and what those mean right now for you. We're going to talk about tax credits and the FFCRA, and where those are today. We're going to spend a bulk of our time, honestly, on this because this is where a lot of the new stuff is. And then we're going to talk a little bit about unemployment benefits and Cobra and other things that have changed. And so we're not necessarily focusing on any one state here, but as many of you know, a lot of states are passing their own rules with some of these same topics that we're talking about today. California, for example, the governor just passed a whole new set of rules that has drastically changed sick leave and other things for California employers. And so there's a lot of that if you have questions about, for your individual state, reach out to us, of course. But here we're really focusing on the federal rules. Okay. Now, as I always like to give some sort of gift or something for you, if you are interested in our COVID-19 toolkit, which has a lot of new material in there, a lot of great information, and then the list of COVID-19 unemployment resources that's broken down by state for you, because this is becoming a big deal now. Go ahead and text the word HR stimulus to 44222, and we'll make sure to send that to your email so you have it as another resource. Of course, these are written resources, so it's good information to have, but if you have questions, just reach out to us. Okay. All right, let's jump into it. Let's talk about the small business relief acts that have been passed. So as many of you know, Congress revived the PPP as part of the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021 that was signed into law in December on December 27th of this past year. And what this did is it basically rebooted PPP for employers across the country. Now it's mostly called PPP2 now for most of you. Now there is a very big deadline coming up with PPP2, and I want to say that right off the bat so it doesn't get missed in any of this content today. That deadline is March 31st, so you're about a week away from that deadline. And so if you have not applied for it, it is vital that you get in touch with your lender that you either got your first PPP loan with, or if you can't get a hold of them, let me know, and I might be able to introduce you to somebody else that might step in. But we're really getting into crunch time, and there hasn't been any indication as of yet that they're going to extend this date. Now, they have extended a lot of dates in the past, but as of right now, it doesn't look like they're going to extend it. So it's very, very important that if you qualify, that you will go ahead and apply for this PPP2 loan by March 31st, and it has to kind of go through the system, and the SBA has to sort of approve it and give you a number for it to be valid. But a lot of people believe that if you get the application in at least by March 31st, you might be okay. Of course, no one knows. So if you haven't gotten that, you didn't know about it, or you forgot about it, jump on that as soon as you can. Now, one of the biggest changes that's happening with PPP is that that this is now available to businesses that got the first PPP loan. There was a lot of belief that maybe PPP2 would not be available to those who got the first PPP loan, but that is incorrect. Everybody who applied the first time around can get the second time. They can get the second PPP loan as well, even if you haven't either used up all your funds from PPP1, which is probably very rare, or if you haven't applied for forgiveness, which is also common. Most of you haven't applied for that yet. You can still apply for the PPP2 loan. So to be able to be eligible for the PPP2 loan is you can get up to a loan of about $2 million, but you have to have 300 or less employees, which most of you have. And then more importantly, you have to show a 25% gross revenue decline in any quarter in 2020 as compared to that same quarter in 2019. So it's just a 25% decline. So for most of you that were closed for 10 weeks or so, between March, mid-March to, late May, early June, you should easily qualify for this in terms of the second quarter of the year. Some of you with states that had a little bit more restrictions, you may qualify going into the third or fourth quarters as well. So if you do qualify and you've got 25% or less, in terms of real revenue in any of those quarters as compared to 2019, then you can apply for this loan. Now remember, this funding is limited, but we don't necessarily believe that all the funding will be used this time around. But the deadline is a very important deadline, the March 31st deadline. So kind of keep that in mind as you plan on deciding whether to do it or not. Now you can receive, just as PPP1 loan, you can receive about 2.5 times your average monthly payroll cost. So that stays the same. But like I mentioned earlier, it's capped at $2 million. Again, most of you, that's not an issue for, you got less than $2 million the first time around, but that is a cap for you to keep in mind. The same rules in terms of how to use it also apply, which means that you either have an 8-week or 24-week period to which you can use the loan. And something that is new, though, is that for many of you that are self-employed, this includes sole proprietors and independent contractors, you also are eligible for the PPP2 loan. So that's not something that necessarily was there the first time around, especially when it launched. So keep that in mind. So for a lot of you that are independent contractors, if you have any employees, or if you're a sole proprietor, you're not a corporation, but you have employees, this might be something you can use. Another rule that hasn't changed is that you're still required to spend 60% on the loan of your loan proceeds on payroll, and then the balance can be used on things like rent and mortgage, interest, utilities. But here's our advice to you. This is the same advice we gave last year, and we're still sticking with this, which is that you are better off. It's going to be much easier for you when you ask for forgiveness if you use the money just for payroll. And the reason for that, as you can imagine, is that it's very easy to run a payroll report showing how much money you spent on your team. And if you use the 24-week period option that many of you used last year, unless you got money very, very early on in the process, you should be able to use up all of your PPP money, PPP2 money, I should say, over that 24-week period. And then when you go ask for forgiveness, it's super easy. You just run a payroll report, you provide some additional documentation, and you're good to go. If you do start using the money for rent and mortgage interest, utilities, you may have to do a lot more work to show that those bills were paid. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind. Now, as we talk about forgiveness, I mentioned you have to use at least 60% of the funds on payroll. Everything else has to be used, over the 24-week period. Again, as I mentioned, please use it for payroll. It just will make your life super easy. Employee and compensation levels and numbers of employees, should remain the same. Again, it's a net number. So if somebody is terminated or they quit and you replace them, that will be fine. Now, the question of how and when to apply is sort of a hotly debated issue these days. Some CPAs in the healthcare world are delaying applying for forgiveness because of the employment retention tax credit, which we're going to talk about in a second. Some people are asking for forgiveness now and hoping to just kind of be done with it. So you have to talk to your CPA. I would highly encourage you to take their advice and follow their direction. For the most part, you'll be able to work with your bank, your lender who gave you the loan, to be able to ask for forgiveness. For those of you who got less than $150,000, the loan application, the forgiveness application is very easy to do. Really, there's no heartache to it. If you got more than $150,000, then you do have to fill out an application. But again, they've tried to streamline it, make it super easy. But please follow the direction of your CPA on this, and then work directly with your lender on how to do it. The only date to kind of keep mind of when it comes to forgiveness is that you have to apply, by the time the maturity date of the loan comes around. And so for most of you, that's still a year out. But just kind of keep that in mind, because that maturity date can sneak up on you if you haven't filed for forgiveness sometime this year. Okay. All right. Let's move on to the next section, which is tax credits and FFCRA. So let's go back just really quickly about FFCRA. So as many of you know, FFCRA was that law that got passed very early on in the COVID sort of world, that allowed your employees to take emergency sick leave and emergency family leave should they fall into certain categories. And if you remember, there were about 5, or 6 actually moments and situations where somebody could take emergency sick leave, and then there was one of those, which was your child being at home under because of school closures, where they could take emergency family leave. So that was sort of up in the air with some of these new rules that the president recently signed. So on March 11th, President Biden signed what is called the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. And this we weren't sure what was going to be in there, even though we were talking to a lot of lobbyists in Washington. We were kind of had our finger on the pulse there with the help of the ADA and some other institutions. What we quickly realized was that there are some parts of this that is still up in the air, and there's a lot of infighting still happening amongst the congressmen and congresswomen about whether or not various aspects of FFCRA should be left in this new law. And so the good news that came out of it when the law was finally signed into place was that FFCRA, which many of you know expired on December 31st, 2020, as part of the rules which made it mandatory, remained voluntary starting January 1. So when it expired on December 31st, the mandatory aspect of it expired on December 31st. It became voluntary January 1. We were afraid that this new law by President Biden would change it to become mandatory again, but thankfully it remained voluntary, right? It remained voluntary. So what that means is that you don't have to provide FFCRA leave to your employees if you don't wish to provide it, right? If you don't wish to provide it, because it is voluntary. Now, if you do decide to provide it, there are some major changes to it that have occurred. And so I'm going to go through that with you. And we're going to talk about whether you should provide it or not. So the first thing, and this is the probably the most important thing, is that it's not retroactive to January 1. The tax credit applies from leave that's taken starting April 1, so next week, April 1, 2021, through September 30th, 2021. Okay, so April 1 to September 30th, 2021. And remember those 6 reasons that I mentioned to you? Well, if you remember, those 6 reasons where someone could take leave applied only to the sick leave, the emergency sick leave part of the FFCRA. The only way somebody could use emergency family leave, which was that 12-week law, their child would have to be at home. So the new law has changed that. So now all 6 of those reasons, right, can be used for both emergency sick leave and emergency family leave. Okay, so all 6 can be used for that. So in essence, an employee could take 12 weeks paid, under any of those six designations. And if any of you need those 6, just email us and we'll get it to you. But that's very very important for you to know. Now, another thing that has changed with regard to this is that it's kind of been expanded even further to add more than those 6. So now, if somebody needs to be out because of immunization reasons related to COVID, or recovering from an injury or disability or illness having to do with COVID, then those also could be reasons why somebody is out under emergency sick leave or emergency FMLE. Okay, really important, right? Really important. This is happening, as most of you know, as more and more people are getting their second shot of the vaccine. They are getting sick, they're being ill, sometimes they're missing a few days of work. If you're part of the lucky few that just has a sore arm, it may not be as big of a deal. But what we are seeing is a lot of employees miss time off of work. And so if that happens, for leave between April 1 and September 30th, then if you decide to give FFCRA leave, then this would qualify. Okay. Now, the other aspect of this is that this kind of resets the rules in terms of the hours. And so if somebody used their FFCRA in 2020, they get sort of a new set of hours, both in terms of the emergency sick leave and also emergency family leave in 2021. And so just kind of keep that in mind. It's not a rollover, it doesn't expire. They get sort of new hours starting this year, if again you choose to give it. Now, part of this, what makes this difficult for many of you is, should you or should you not provide this leave to your employees? And when we were in the middle of COVID in 2020, with the reopenings and the terminations and the furloughing and all of that stuff, this was easier to manage, believe it or not, because one, it was mandatory, so you had to provide it. But two, there was so much going on at the time that we didn't necessarily have the same concerns as you may have now with regard to your employee management sort of scenario. And what I mean by that is, right now, your offices have been open for many months. You're probably getting close to, or getting back to, as close as you can to pre-COVID levels in terms of your production. And some of you have even surpassed that. And so now losing a team member for 12 weeks is a little bit different than losing somebody potentially, a year ago, when you were only open maybe a few days, or you were starting to sort of ramp up, your patients. And so how do you make that decision? Well, this is a very personal decision that everyone has to make. And the only thing I can tell you is that it's going to be different office to office. Some offices are going to decide to give it because they understand that they are going to get the money back, and that's important for you to know as well. Any money that you spend under these new FFCRA rules, the government will give you back a dollar for dollar credit on your quarterly payroll taxes, just as they did last year. So you get the money back, but it's a little bit of a cash flow issue, because if you have multiple people out, that could be a concern. But then also, of course, you are paying this money without having your team member there, while you're probably going to be looking and searching for a replacement for that person. So you're kind of paying twice for it, although you're getting some of it back. What's important to know is you cannot and should not discriminate. In other words, you can't decide to give some people FFCRA leave and other people no FFCRA leave. So once you make the decision to give it to one person, you should give it to everybody. And I know there's a lot of reasons why You may not want to give it to everybody. There may be people that you want to give it to and some people that you don't. Some people may have a great excuse for getting it while others maybe not. I understand all of those, and those all make sense. But you have to be careful because the law has been very clear about not discriminating, right? So if you discriminate, there's a really good chance that you won't get the tax credits from the IRS. And but honestly, I think that's going to be the least of your problems. If you discriminate, you most likely are gonna get sued, and that's the part that I think is we're seeing large numbers of this right now across the board. And so just be careful because there's lawyers who are looking to do this. There's a law firm. There's a law firm. We got a letter from just a few days ago on behalf of a client who one of my litigators found out has filed 1,100 cases against businesses in the state of California since July of last year. 1,100 cases. I mean, it has become a machine, right? It's become a machine. Now, we're really good at getting rid of these and fighting, and we do all these sort of strategic things to get you out of trouble and minimize your cost, but it's still a headache. It still costs money. It's still, is energy, it's time, it's stress, it's loss of sleep. And so it's just not worth it. It's not worth it. Even if you win, right? Even if we win at the end, it still will not necessarily be worth it in terms of that. So if we can avoid all of that now, I would say let's try to avoid it. And so just be careful about this discrimination side. It's super important. Okay. So that is that. Now, what are the advantages of giving this to folks? There are some advantages. If you do have a sick employee, they don't have to choose between their paycheck and coming to work sick and maybe getting the rest of the office, sick. And by the way, I'm not talking about COVID necessarily, right? It could just be the common cold or the flu or something of that nature. And so there's that. We had one doctor that had an employee come back and the employee was coughing on the phone while talking to a patient, and the patient went and wrote all this stuff on social media about this office because they thought that this person coughing had the coronavirus in the office. I mean, it was just this like ridiculous thing. And the poor girl, not girl, but the poor lady that was working, that was coughing, had was just had asthma basically, and she was sick. And but she wasn't, it wasn't COVID, it wasn't the flu, it wasn't anything like that. It was just she had asthma and she was having a coughing fit, and yet the patient reacted really poorly and decided to blast it on social media. So you can imagine the damage control that was involved there. So there's that perk of providing this leave. The other thing is that, as I mentioned, you do get your money back, right? You do get your money back through a tax credit. So you do need to fill out a form, and if you're an HR for Health client, good for you, because we do have those necessary forms on the site that you need to have them fill out in order to get the tax credit. So please make sure you use those and you fill them out. And making sure you're tracking time well and accurately is vitally important there. Those two things, if the IRS comes calling or they're requiring proof, which we believe they will, because there's a lot of money set aside for enforcement, that you need to have that. You need to have that data, and so make sure you use that. So those are the things regarding the FFCRA extension. I know you may have questions. Feel free to put them in the chat box here. Our team will answer them, or I will at the end, or we can follow up with you afterwards, of course. One question that I do get a lot is, can I require documentation if someone has gotten the vaccine and now they're having symptoms? They're sick, they're not feeling well. And the answer is yes. You can, just like anything else, you can ask for a doctor's note, or you can ask for something if someone is sick, or they're claiming to be sick because they've gotten the vaccine and they have some side effects. The reality is that in all the cases that we've seen, most people, like 9 out of 10 people, are out for one day. And then they're back the next day. Every once in a while, you'll hear about somebody being out multiple days, which could be totally accurate. In those situations, I think getting a doctor's note is totally valid, because they're probably going to seeing a doctor or at least calling someone. But if they're out for one day, you have to decide, is it worth your time to do that or not. So, all right, let's go into the next section, which is the employee retention credit. You all have probably seen a lot of information about this. I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty of it because it takes a PhD in math to figure some of this out. But I will give you the most important information that you need to know about this. And this is really an area where you can make and get back in terms of tax credits a lot of money from the federal government, right? So what is the employment retention tax credit? Well, this was passed in March of 2020. Back in March, this was passed. But when it was passed, it was written in a way that implied that if you got PPP money, you would not be able to take advantage of the ERTC. So it was worded kind of strangely. And so a lot of people discounted it because the PPP money, for the most part, was going to be substantially more based on the calculations that we just went through and that most of you experienced. But that has now changed. So let me tell you what it was in 2020, and I'll tell you how much better it's gotten right now, and more importantly, how you could potentially get tens of thousands of dollars in tax credits. Okay, so when it was passed in 2020, you basically got up to 50. You could get up to 50% of the first $10,000 of wages paid to an employee during a quarter. Right? So 50% of 10,000 is $5,000 cap per employee per quarter, right? So you could have gotten that, in the second quarter of 2020, in the third quarter of 2020, and the fourth quarter of 2020, because it was set to expire at the end of 2020. So that was $5,000 per employee up to $5,000 because it was 50% of the first $10,000 of wages. Okay. Then what happened in December? President Trump passed the Consolidated Appropriations Act, and that expanded the ERTC significantly and clarified some rules. So now what the rule says is that the credit was extended until June 30th of 2021. Right, so June 30th of this year, so the second quarter of this year, it's coming up quick, believe it or not. It increased the credit from 50% to 70% of the first $10,000, okay, paid an employee during the quarter. Okay, so now it's a maximum of $7,000 per employee. Okay, and then expanded the eligibility of the loan to anybody who got a PPP loan. So now, if you got the PPP1 loan, if you're getting the PPP2 loan, you can also get this tax credit, right? You can also get this tax credit. Hugely important, okay? So how do you do it? How do you qualify? Well, the old rule said that if you had to have 50% reduction in gross receipts, okay, 50%. The new rule has reduced that to 20%, right, to 20%. Now, you also had to have under the old rule less than 100 employees. Now it's less than 500 employees, which for most of you, neither one of those matters. But what's important to keep in mind is that these rules have become a lot more flexible to you, because most of you in the second quarter, and a lot of you in the third quarter, and some of you in the fourth quarter of last year, and also maybe going into this year, have seen a 20% reduction, right? Have seen a 20% reduction. So that was what happened in December of 2020. President Biden made it even better, right? In March, on March 11th, when he signed the new rule, he extended it not to June, but to December 31st of 2021, right? So now this rule is extended. The ERTC can be achieved all the way through the end of the year, right? But he didn't make any changes to the credit amount or eligibility or any of that stuff. So all that is the same, and it's already really good. So you don't have to really worry about it. So What does this mean for you? Well, with the second round of PPP loans coming to an end next week, the ERTC allows you the opportunity to continue receiving federal relief payments through the rest of 2021, right? And as I gave you an example, I think you'll see these numbers can be really substantial. So I'll give you a quick example of a client very recently that we did this analysis for. They had 25 employees, right? So their maximum ERTC would be 175,000 per quarter, right? So that was 25 employees times $7,000, or the equivalent of $700,000 for the entire year of 2021, right? For the entire year of 2021. So here's what I would tell you. Remember what I said about, you need a PhD in math to make this kind of really work? Well, that's not what we're talking about here, right? This is high school math. The PhD math comes when you take this data to your CPA and you say, hey, Mr. CPA or Mrs. CPA, figure this out for me. Do I qualify? How do I do this? If you need a referral because your CPA is not knowledgeable about this, let me know. There's some really good people around the country who do a fantastic job about this, and I'm happy to give you their names. And they're happy to do it for you, by the way. But if you want to know what you could potentially get, is take your number of employees, whatever that is, right? 10, 20, 5, 30, multiply by the maximum, which is $7,000. And that's how much you could get every quarter, right? Every quarter this year. And then you multiply that by 4, right? And you could get that, in 2021. And that's assuming, you can't go back in time and do it for 2020. So this is tens of thousands of potential dollars waiting for you to receive as tax credits, right? They're not going to send you a check, but they're going to give it to you as tax credits. And so that's super easy. And this, by the way, can be easily claimed on your quarterly payroll tax form your quarterly tax form form 941, which is a payroll filing. And you'll be allowed to offset payroll tax deposits and other things. So this is huge, right? This is huge. Not all of you will qualify, but many of you will qualify, right? Many of you will qualify. Okay. Now, for those of you who are startups, the new law that President Biden did sign does extend this to startups as well. It's a little bit more restrictive. So if you're a startup practice that opened up after February 15th of 2020, and your revenues declined by 90% as to what it was the previous year. So if your revenues decline 90% this year from the year before, and then you could get some of this benefit. Your credit is capped at $50,000 per quarter, so just kind of keep that in mind. So it's a little bit less favorable to startups than to existing businesses, but for most of you that are on the phone, this could mean a lot of money, a lot of money. So please look into it. Do not let it go, and make sure your CPA can do these calculations for you and stay on top of it. I'll tell you, one thing I learned, many years ago when my dad was sick and he eventually passed away. But one thing I learned was that you got to be your own advocate in the medical sort of system, right? You absolutely have to be your own advocate. And one thing I've learned as a lawyer working with doctors around the country is that you have to be also your own advocate when you're, looking into tax matters and refund matters and all this stuff having to do with your CPAs or whatnot, because not all healthcare CPAs are made the same. And so just keep that in mind. Be your own advocate. Make sure you know the rules. Make sure you follow up with them, and make sure it's done correctly as best as you can by looking at the data, because this could mean a lot of funds for you. Now, this is a busy time of the year for the CPAs because tax returns are due. Some are due this, next month, some are due in May. But still, this is important. This is important. All right, let's talk about unemployment benefits as well. So unemployment benefits have been extended. For many of you, this is no longer really a huge issue for a couple of reasons. One is that the government, didn't go as far as they did when they had COVID. The benefits stays at $300 a week through September 6th of this year of 2021. For anyone who has, filed for unemployment, they do get some extended time to, for unemployment. It goes from 24 weeks to 53 weeks. And so, there's more perks like that. But as many of you know, this is not really an issue anymore, because a lot of people who are, if your offices are open, your employees are back working or they have found another job. Back in, last summer, it was a totally different scenario because people were, the unemployment benefits were so high that people just didn't want to return to work. They were getting more being on unemployment benefits. That's not really the case anymore in most of the country. I mean, Washington State has the highest, minimum wage laws. Then it's, California and New York. I'm sorry, California and Massachusetts. But in most other states, the benefits, the $300 doesn't really, go as far as it did last summer. So this shouldn't be an issue. But if you do have somebody, filing for unemployment, we do recommend that you don't fight unemployment, for a lot of reasons. It's a soft cost to you. It's not actual dollars out of your pocket. It does upset the employee a lot as well, and so they're more likely to sue you. And I'm happy to go into that with anybody, but it is, and there's a cap, by the way, that that you pay for every employee in terms of unemployment every year. So it's not like, you're paying really a lot more out of pocket. But we've got a list of the COVID-19 unemployment resources for all of you, broken down by every state. So if you missed the text link early in this presentation, we'll provide it again at the end. And if you want, you can get a list of all those benefits. So that's one thing that has changed. The other thing that has changed is a Cobra. So right now, the government under these new rules under the Biden administration, now you have to pay for Cobra 100% of an employee's Cobra coverage. If you've got a group health plan and they get terminated or they leave your employment for another reason, and so Cobra is now your responsibility. And so this is a big deal because, as most of you know, Cobra is very, very expensive, right? It's very, very expensive, and so you do have to pay for that now if you have group health insurance. The good news is that you do get a tax credit through September of this year. So even though you are paying for it up front, you do get a refundable tax credit through Medicare payroll taxes and whatnot, and so for the premiums that you paid. But again, it's more things that you have to kind of manage and govern, but that is available to you, and so just kind of keep that in mind. It is a cash flow it is a cash flow issue, of course, because Cobra is so expensive, but it's something to keep in mind. That is now a new requirement. One thing that did not get into the new law, thankfully, is the minimum wage increase that was being discussed. So for those of you in like I said, Washington, Massachusetts, California, it's not a huge increase for many of you, to go to the $15 minimum wage because you're already at $13 and change. But in many places around the country, minimum wage is at $7, $8, $9. So this would have been a significant increase and a huge dent in profitability and cash flow for many offices. Setting aside all the other reasons why it might have been socially a good idea to pass this, but it did not make it pass. So we don't have to worry about that for the moment. If it does, if your state passes on minimum wage rules, because the federal government didn't, just please keep in mind that this could impact people in your office that you have put down as being exempt employees, because in many situations, the exempt employees, not only must they be paid a salary, but that salary must be at least double minimum wage. So if they go up to $50, or $15, I should say, then they need to be paid at least $30 an hour to qualify. So there's a little bit of those. So if you're an HR for Health customer, I mean, that's why we're here for, that's why we're here. So reach out to us, talk to us, ask us questions. That's why we're here. If you're not an HR for Health customer, it's another added benefit of being an HR for Health customer is to be able to answer these questions for you without stress. All right. So as we end tonight, here's the toolkit and the unemployment resources benefit that's broken down by state that I was mentioning. So please text the word HR stimulus to 44222. You do have to spell stimulus correctly, and but it's HR stimulus and then 44222, and then you should you should be able to get that in your email shortly. And now we really are going to go to, I think, probably the most important part of tonight's presentation, which is what do you do next, right? What do you do next? And those of you who have sat through my other seminars, I love this portion because I think this is where real action happens, right? Real things occur. And the reason this is the moment of truth is because you spent Wednesday night with me, and you're going to probably go home and maybe get a glass of wine, spend some time with your kids, and be home and relax and kind of just take it all in. And then tomorrow you're going to get back to business as normal, right? You're going to go back to the office, you're going to have your patients, you're going to put on all your PPEs, you're going to have your morning huddle, and then all of this stuff that we've talked about starts to slowly but surely dissipate. It's important, but you start to forget it, right? You start to forget it. It's human nature. I forget what I had for lunch, let alone, something like this from the previous night. So if you're anything like me, I strongly urge you to do this next step, which is go ahead and write down either in a piece of paper or on your phone. Go ahead and write down one thing that you have done, that you have learned tonight that you want to do in the next 7 days. And then one more thing that you're going to do in the next 14 days. And then one final thing in the next 21 days. And if you do these things, what's going to end up happening is something really special, which is that you're going to be able to get a lot of things done in a very short amount of time. And because you're telling the universe what's most important to you, right? You're telling the universe what's most important to you. And if you don't do this, what ends up happening is that we just forget, because whatever's in our head, we start to forget. So please take the time to do that. We've got, if you got any questions, please, email us at compliance@HR4Health. Of course, hugely important, email us there. We will respond to you as soon as we can. And if you'd like to learn more about HR for Health, please, schedule a time with one of our team members, and they're happy to do an HR audit for you to make sure you're HR compliant, and then they'll walk you through any of this stuff as well. So, all right, so that's all I had, everyone, for tonight. Kim, do you want to go through some questions? Are there any there I should go through?
Hey there. That was great. Thank you so much, Ali. Can you hear me now? Yeah?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yep, you're great.
Okay, great. We were having a little bit of, you were coming in and out a little bit at the end, but that was great. We have a ton of questions, but I think I'm just gonna narrow it down to just a couple. Let's see, one of them is, if FFCRA is voluntary, then is the safest legal course would be not to give it to anyone?
Great question. So yes, if it is voluntary, so if you don't want to give it to everyone, that is the safest approach. It's probably the path of least resistance. Just be ready to have the conversation with some of your team members if they bring it up as to why you're not doing it. But yes, that would be the best and the easiest.
Excellent. Another one is, can we require employees to get the vaccine now that they are readily available?
Yes, great question. Absolutely. You can require your employees to get the vaccine. You could have done it even before it was readily available. Now, there are two exemptions. If an employee says that they cannot get it because of religious reasons or medical reasons, then under those circumstances, you do have to accommodate them, which means, protecting them by, doing all the things probably you're already doing, fiberglass, PPEs, the gowns, the masks, and all of that stuff. But those are really the two exemptions from from requiring somebody to get the vaccine. The other reason I think it's a really good question, Kim, is that we're seeing some really interesting stats coming from around the country. What we're seeing is that 90% of a lot of doctors are getting the vaccine, but only in the 20% range, like 20 to 30% range, is what the team members are getting in terms of the vaccine. So that means that a lot of team members are not going to get the vaccine. And this, by the way, is whether you're a physician, a dentist, an optometrist, a veterinarian. We're seeing this sort of around the country. So it's really interesting, and I think this idea of requiring the vaccine is going to become much more prevalent if less people are getting the vaccine as we initially thought that would.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and agreed. We are definitely seeing it more readily available, which is interesting and good. Okay, we do have a ton more questions, but I think we will get back to everyone, we promise. And we see a lot of questions asking for CPA recommendations, so we will make sure to get you those. And we thank you so much, Ali, for breaking this down. It's a lot of new information for you and for everyone, and we appreciate you all the time. And thank you for everything tonight. And thank you, everyone, for being here.
All right, everyone, have a great night. We'll make sure to get back to everyone. Take care. Bye.
Bye.